The rand has touched its weakest level in 4 months after news that South Africa's economy performed far worse than expected in the fourth quarter, while hawkish comments from the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, have raised concerns that interest rates would be raised again, weighing on sentiment. Let's speak now to Jimmy Moyaha, independent analyst, who's going to give us a sense of how the JSE is shaping up. Jimmy, good morning to you, and thank you for your time. The rand trading dangerously close to that 19 rand against the dollar mark. What's driving this weakness, and did our GDP results yesterday have anything to do with it?
Morning, Colin. Morning to the viewers. So the factors that you mentioned or alluded to earlier were definitely factors that played into the rand's performance. If you remember our conversation leading up to the weeks or the week just before we got grey listed, I mentioned that the rand was at a critical level leading up to the grey listing conversation in that week. It was the same week as the budget week. We saw the rand was sitting close to that 18 rand 50 level, and I mentioned back then that the catalysts for going beyond 1850 and breaching that last bit of resistance were the South African factors, and if we were to get any new conversations from the US that would drive US dollar strength rather, and that's exactly what we got. Yesterday, Fed Chair Jerome Powell came out with a very hawkish tone to say that the US could potentially look at increasing the rate at which it hikes interest rates at this point in an effort to curb inflation. Now, that re-injected fear into all of the markets. We saw all of the equity markets across the board. U.S. equity markets finished in the red yesterday. Asian equity markets are in the red today as it stands, and South African equity markets are in the red as well. So all markets from an equity front have reacted negatively to the sentiments by the Fed chair. Along with commodity markets, we've seen that the gold price is back near the $1,810 an ounce mark. The oil price is back near the $80 a barrel mark. So all markets didn't receive those news positively, because that then means that we could potentially see another rampant rate hiking cycle from the US, which will give the US dollar strength even more strength, which again will affect markets like gold and the currencies like the USD to the rand. So not very positive from that perspective, but locally we've had our own factors that have been unable to drive rand strength, and that's why you saw that even after the cabinet reshuffle, there was a very muted response from the rand's perspective, because the other factors that we are contending with, factors like load shedding, factors like the latest GDP numbers that have come out, are factors that are not giving rise to rand strength, but providing confirmation that there's continued weakness and continued negative sentiment within the South African market. We know that we've got business confidence numbers coming out of RMB today, I believe, and that will also be an indicator of where the market is, or where the viewpoint is around the South African market at this stage.
Yeah, let's talk about Car Powership. That's the Turkish company that's hoping to supply South Africa with over 1,000 megawatts of electricity. Now, it has had one of its 3 appeal rulings rejected. Talk us through why this development is important.
So, Car Powerships is looking to set up their ships, I think, in 3 strategic locations. So, Richards Bay, Saldanha, and I think it's the Kruger Harbour, and in the Eastern Cape. And so the first setup in the Eastern Cape has received the setback from the perspective of the fact that when the surveys and the studies were done around the area, it looks as though the consultants that were working for Car Power at the time reported that the people within the environment were small scale and not necessarily a true reflection of what was being intended within the Eastern Cape. And so the environmental side of that conversation is what's rearing its ugly head now. We've got the Environmental Minister, Barbara Creecy, also coming out to say that regardless of what's happening, whatever solutions need to be deployed need to be solutions that address environmental concerns, and we cannot simply disregard environmental concerns for the sake of implementing these solutions. So that appeal went through, and it looks as though the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment has looked at that and said that they agree with that, and so that's delaying the deployment of the Car Powerships in the Eastern Cape. We don't yet know what will happen in the other regions, the Saldanha and Richards Bay setups that I mentioned earlier, because that information hasn't yet been made public knowledge. But what we do know for now is if these setbacks continue, then car parks cannot deploy their ships, and they cannot deploy those solutions to our power crisis.
Sure. Let's talk company news. Royal Bafokeng Platinum publishing its annual results and dividend declaration. How are their numbers looking?
So RB Plats didn't fare the best at this point in time. Their annual results came in, and it looks like all of their metrics were down. So revenues were down, earnings before interest and tax was down, headline earnings was down, basic earnings, pretty much all of the metrics were in the red. And the business said that they had to contend with a number of headwinds from an inflationary standpoint, from cost of sort of an input cost type of situation that weighed in as well on the disruptive period that they had, as well as the fact that they're still coming out of some of the effects of what they saw in the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, what's interesting about the dividend declaration, of course, is that they're still going to pay about 1.5 billion rand in dividends following that dividend declaration, and that's a final gross dividend, I think, of about 5.35 rand. So that's still good for RB Plats shareholders. What it now means is, based on these results, we might see a slightly different conversation. We don't know between Implats, Northern, around the RB Plats deal. We know that deal is still up in the air, and largely it looks as though one of the influencing factors now is becoming the PIC as well, because they're a stakeholder in not only Implats, Northern, but also in RB Plats. So they could potentially be one of the big decision makers in terms of how that deal pans out. But the numbers, all in all, rather bearish for RB Royal Bafokeng at this stage, and hopefully this will be something that they turn around in the new reporting period in the new financial year.
Let's conclude the conversation with Momentum Metropolitan also publishing their interim results for the 6 months, which ended in December of 2022. How did they fare?
Well, they fared well. They fared a lot better than RB Plats did. They increased all of their metrics. Earnings was up. Normalized earnings was up, which is stripped out. Normalized headline earnings, which strips out the effects of sort of once-off events that can affect headline earnings. That was up quite significantly. I think some 46% up there as well. So they had a good reporting period. They did, of course, report that their Momentum Investments unit was one of their drags in terms of bringing in new business and growing in that respect. So that was one of their only units that performed negatively. And they cited, of course, that the pressure on consumers, the pressure on disposable income, and the pressure on Momentum Wealth's ability to attract new investments at this stage is the reason that division underperformed. But the rest of their divisions performed exceptionally well. They also said that their return on capital has increased. I think it's up to some 18% from some 15% in the prior reporting period. So they've shown stronger numbers, and they look to continue with this momentum, saying that obviously coming off of the effects of the COVID pandemic, a lot of that was around the mortality experiences, and that's why they had such a lower base from last year, or a significantly lower performance from last year. But they're saying that numbers from this perspective and numbers from that mortality experience are back to pre-pandemic levels. They're satisfied with that, and they're satisfied that their business operations are starting to normalize going forward. So they do foresee that going forward they'll perform a lot better than what we have been seeing in the 2022 reporting period. So we can expect that in the second half of the year for Momentum, they could potentially outperform the second half of last year. We could see a good, strong performance for them when they close out the year.
Jimmy Moyaha, thank you very much for your time.